In a real side experience I shared relatively recently, so it was revealed to me the presence of a particular planet that was home to a species of bipedal animal-like body forms, two-legged cats, canines, and lizards, if you will. I would engage with them, become a temporary part of their society, assuming a form that allowed me to blend in, all for the purpose of primarily sharing the opportunity of the ears, the references of which were generally globally accepted by them. The species would be keen to not only embark on their own awareness process as a whole, but agreeable to promote the true reality, the real guides, and the real universes to all other body forms and species receptive to the information. For indeed, this species were technological. They boasted advanced spacefaring capability, and so were able to traverse the stars, reach out and make a contact in an effort to share the real purpose, that of ears recognition to all. This real side experience would open up with a brief view of myself continuing to maintain a contact with this species, as though checking in on their awareness progress and affording any help and assistance I could provide. When I initially became as a part of their species for the purposes of promoting the ears, it was considered necessary for me to adopt an outward form that allowed me to be as one of them, and at first this wouldn't be disclosed, for they were a very secluded species, occupying an area of creation untouched by any other. No galactic war had embroiled them, or the infringement of control inclined species, such as the reptilians, into their territory, due mainly to how their particular spot in creation operated within a certain frequency that was in actuality lethal to any body type not indigenous to that creational area. As such, they had very little contact with the species beyond their own, and up until that moment they had no desire to explore space beyond their immediate system, and so would be rather unsettled if I were to have engaged with them in my usual human form. Only later, when they embraced the real purpose of ears recognition and began their creational space exploration to promote the ears, would they become a little more at ease with the body forms not their own. And so, on a subsequent encounter with them, when they had in fact created a colony on the Earth, potentially using the Earth as a base of operations, should the planet suffer an extinction event which rendered it barren, as is one of the many possible overall human experiences that may take place, it wasn't required that I maintain a form as one of their own. However, all species will have their attitudes, and in regards to other body types, and despite them being more acclimatized to the endless variety and expression of a form, they still were somewhat ill at ease in the company of such, to the extent that rendered them less approachable. As such, even though they were in full awareness of my being a human, so in this recent real side experience, I elected to adopt the form of a bipedal wolf as I travelled all over creation, engaging with the various individuals of the species as they deployed their spacecraft to every corner of this simulated realm. My form of travel was somewhat less technologically orientated, for on the real side and through the real awareness, we are only as limited as we then decide to be. We can make use of what has been created, the portals, the spacecraft, but oftentimes it is far more efficient to just instantaneously relocate to each position in creation that we want to be. The awareness simply inserts our simulated avatar vehicle to operate through and engage with other beings, wherever it makes sense for it to be dispatched to. Interestingly, my wolf form that I assumed also had glowing red eyes that would flash, a curious additional feature, but something that drew the attention of my personal self, and I recalled on awaking. But overall, as I said, I was just keeping tabs on the bipedal animal-like species and assisting them where required. But they seemed very focused and intent on promoting and distributing these references from one end of creation to the other. In the next scene, one unrelated from the first, but just as I had initially infiltrated the bipedal animal species, and they were oblivious that in reality I wasn't one of their own, so a similar assignment was in effect now. Only here I was infiltrating a dark force operation and posing as one of them. It seemed a military operation of some kind. The other dark force participants were human, as far as one could visually tell, and all, including myself, were boarding a large plane. As the real awareness is a part of what is in actuality, the everything reality, then it is this reality that animates through all consciousness, and available then to the real awareness are all ideas, intents, everything that is behind and affects the surface simulation. Consequently, were one able to recognize and move into the true reality of themselves, so any deception is laid bare, all intent is revealed, and impossible would it be for any individual to assume a position or outer body form that in fact wasn't their own, and have us unrecognizing that this was so. Alas, for the dark forces, as they are locked into their created personal self-consciousness, denying themselves their real awareness positioning and the impressions it can afford as to the reality of what's taking place in their presence beyond the surface front, so it is easier for us to infiltrate their operations, to assume outer guises that we can pose as one of them, and the real awareness will afford its created, simulated form everything required that exposure is avoided, a convincing act in other words, supplying all that is needed for the task, technological knowledge, the correct phrases and terminology to apply in a conversation, even alien languages where necessary, etc. The whole purpose of my infiltration was a spying operation for whatever these particular Dark Force military characters would reveal by my being in their presence. that although we could simply have observed from the real awareness position aside from the simulation, which makes no simulated presence necessary, to directly participate rather makes it more an adventure and better recalled on waking, as a direct immersion into the situations, as opposed to just observing like watching a movie, will be more intense and impacting. The leader of this military group seemed to be a particularly fierce human female, and with the Dark Force group and myself now aboard the plane, present also were a group of what appeared to be terrified human prisoners. The Dark Forces have a tireless proclivity where the exacting of a torture and harm is concerned, as this is their thrill, sensation, distraction, and boredom alleviator, and the purpose of these prisoners was as a source of amusement. They were to be tortured throughout the duration of the plane's flight by all the Dark Force military on board. This would include my participation, and should I not do so, this would rouse suspicion. And as the torture began, so I would refuse, and conjured up a very convincing explanation that I didn't recall on waking, but that rather got me off the hook, as it were. And additionally, would my explanation include the acceptable justification of my leaving the plane, as I didn't wish to observe the tortures throughout the flight. However, my intention was still to reach what would be the plane's destination, as the location where the plane terminated was where I was to gather intel from my spying assignment. As I said earlier, we can make use of the created means of transportation, or through the real awareness can our simulated forms be positioned anywhere it makes a sense to be. And so it was that I would be relocated to the plane's destination, what seemed to be a military Dark Force bunker that served as an operational base, but also as accommodation for all those present. I would present a plausible explanation as to how I had made it to the base, along the lines of an alternative flight. My purpose was to remain in my role as one of the Dark Force military operatives for whatever duration was necessary to gather the information required, the nature of which wasn't disclosed to the personal self at that moment. As is generally the case, the real awareness takes the reins of the experience and operates the simulated body forms to carry out whatever assignments we happen to be involved with. The personal self rather just sits back and watches what's taking place, piecing together what has been recognized and determined from what is visually occurring, coupled with the real awareness impressions, which afford a greater clarification. And so really the personal self-sense is that of being puppeteered during these assignments, oftentimes with little or no inkling as to what it's doing until it becomes apparent, or indeed how it is even able to do the things that it can, as all the personal self knows is based on the collated references of its current memory body and the developed current lifetime abilities. The real awareness, however, isn't so limited, and the only limitations in how it can operate its simulated experience-inserted avatars are those applied by the personal self through the ideas of consciousness still clung to and unreleased. I was to remain as an infiltrator at the base for quite the duration, during which, as I manned several key stations, so I was as though recording information covertly on a kind of handheld device, which looked rather like a miniature cell phone. At one point, however, I would take a Dark Force military individual into my confidence, as at that moment he was sincere in his intent to step up, as impressions confirmed, but all too easy can intent fluctuate. I had disclosed to him my operation and the intelligence I was gathering, and when he deviated back and reneged on his awareness process, so he would betray me and expose my deception. To remain now at the base, so I would inevitably be embroiled in a confrontation, and this would indeed be so, but it would take an unexpected form. I was anticipating having to deal with the military Dark Force operatives at the base, all of which had been human, but it seems the base was occupied by other body forms, expressions of the Dark Forces, but that which had remained concealed up until this moment. For I would suddenly be beset upon by hordes of monstrous beings, shaggy-furred creatures, others that were scaled and twisted. Some looked very demonic in appearance. They were more like feral animals than the more sentient creational body types, and as though this was the purpose they served, utilized as frenzied assassins. I would endure, however, for as everything in creation, every experience, including those we share with others, is agreement dependent as to the particulars and parameters of what can take place, so it is that no being can harm us unless we agree that they can, that we have the idea permissions installed in our consciousness that effect the ability of others to exact harm upon us or eliminate us. The process of awareness is coupled with the facing and releasing of all consciousness agreements, including those we have in relation to others. As such, we become increasingly untouchable as we operate on the real side, and as our assailants decide to attempt our destruction, that we lack the agreements that effect simulation where they are successful, so then we will mitigate and put down their efforts in whatever simulated ways such happen to be presented. In this case, I transformed into an equally as formidable body type, a huge, fur-covered form that nullified my would-be slayers. However, the various distorted attacking body forms were relentless in numbers and determination. At one point, I even produced in addition a kind of energy sword that reminded me a little of a Star Wars lightsaber, and this I would also use in my defense. Ultimately, the situation became somewhat tiresome. The creatures were unable to eliminate me, but were unceasing in their efforts, and unlimited seemingly in their numbers, and so would the real awareness extract its simulated self from the scene. I vacated the base, leaving behind the Dark Force human operatives and the horde of monstrous assailants. I had secured a sufficient amount of intel from the base for whatever purpose that served, and although I had intended to remain longer, this proved an impossibility in the face of my betrayal and exposure. Perhaps I may be shown more as to the nature, perhaps, of the information I did manage to secure at a later moment, but for now the experience ended. And so, sing the new you song. It is your connection to the true reality, the all is, that the real you, your real awareness, is a part of. New